The Broch, the historic borough, shellfish capital, herring boom superpower, a recht fisher town, comprised of around 13,000 folk, for the Doric dialect is strong, yet the town hersel is isolated. There is no longer any railway, and Aberdeen is still a far cry. But from this out-in-the-sticks location, you'd be surprised the influence that Fraserburgh has had on the world. There's been a fair few stories of the place, and in this episode, I wouldn't mind just sitting down and having a wee listen to some of them. Travelling south fae the Broch, to the city of Aberdeen, there's a ruined house standing by the side of the road. The old ruin, as long as I can mind, has been a testament to creativity, and over the years its granite walls have been covered with a bonny array of artworks. Nowadays, you'll find a painting of an old man, and a suit of Japanese armour. That man is Thomas Blake Glover. Kent is the Scottish samurai, and he's one of the Broch's most famous sons. He was born in 1838. He was the loon of Mary Findlay for Son End, and Thomas Berry Glover, the chief coastguard in Fraserburgh. The Glover family's original home was down on Commerce Street, for you'll now find the Glover Memorial Garden, as well as the Glover & Co. fish and chip shop. His tale, though, is nae an ordinary one. It's the story of a brocher for reshaped the world as we ken it. With a solid education for the gymnasium school in all Aberdeen, Thomas left Scotland at just 19. He set off for Shanghai, China, to work with the Scottish firm Jardine, Matheson & Co., one of the biggest British trading firms in the East at the time. At this point, Japan was a feudal society, ruled by the shogun, and it had been isolated from the rest of the world for centuries. Strict policies meant Japan had fallen far behind in technology and industry compared to the West, but the tides were changing. In July 1853, an American fleet arrived in Japan to demand open trade, bringing warships to make sure the message was clear. Reluctantly, Japan opened its ports, allowing Western merchants to trade. It was a pivotal moment in history, and Thomas Blake Glover saw an opportunity. Glover arrived in Nagasaki on the 19th of September 1859, ready to make his mark. He worked first as an agent for Jardine, Matheson & Co., but soon struck out on his own, establishing Glover & Co. As Japan plunged into turmoil with the shogun's forces fighting against rebel clans, Glover, ever the savvy businessman, traded with both sides. He supplied weapons and even organised for Japanese warships to be built in Aberdeen's own William Duthie's shipyard. Ships like the Sarah and the Satsuma were crafted here in Scotland and sent to aid the rebel clans. Glover also played a crucial role in bringing Japanese leaders to the West. The famous Chosu 5, a group of young samurai, travelled to London and Aberdeen to learn about Western technology and ideas. Having never left Japan, they must have got the shock of their life, seeing the grand buildings and bustling societies of Britain at the time. The Chosu 5 returned to Japan with knowledge that would ultimately transform the country, with some even taking up positions of power in Japan's new government. Thomas Glover's influence stretched far and wide. He helped expand Nagasaki Harbour, making it a hub of trade in the industry. He introduced Japan's first steam locomotive, the Iron Duke, which was demonstrated on an 8-mile track in the Ura district of Nagasaki. He developed and managed a coal mine, keeping Japan's industrial ambitions fueled, and later in life, he founded the Japan Brewery Company, which to this day produces Kirin beer, one of Japan's most popular drinks. By the time he passed, Glover was a trusted advisor to the Mitsubishi Company. een of Japan's most powerful corporations, and he became so respected that he was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, a rare honour for a Westerner. For his achievements, Thomas Blake Glover is still remembered as a Brocher at heart. His legacy lives on both here and in Japan, for his pivotal role in modernising a nation to the artefacts and monuments left in his honour. If you ever find yourself in Nagasaki, you can visit Glover House and Garden, now a museum dedicated to his life's work. It's a story of ambition, bravery and determination, from a young loon for Commerce Street to the Scottish samurai, a man who changed the course of history. If you're keen to ken more, I'd recommend picking up Scottish Samurai by Alexander Mackay, or paying a visit to the Maritime Museum in Aberdeen to have a deeper dive into the extraordinary tale of Thomas Blake Glover. Aye, fit a legacy to leave behind, and apparently his chipper's nae too bad either. Now you canna come to Fraserburgh without noticing the lighthouse. Kinnaird Head, built upon the Fraser clan's castle, and the very first lighthouse in Scotland, and the beginning of the Scottish Lighthouse Board. Now the Museum of Scottish Lighthouses, it tells the tales of lighthouse keepers, their work, the dynasty of Stevenson engineers, and the progress of lighthouse, lamp and lens development. But just down for the lighthouse, you'll find the little square tower. The Wine Tower, as it's kent now. But this here is the oldest building in the Broch, built sometime between 1559 and 1606. But with this tower comes this legend. Isabel Fraser was the only daughter of Alexander, the 8th Laird of Philorth, and the man that founded the free port of Fraserburgh. She wasna spoilt, she was brought up to be a good Protestant, though her mother leaned towards Rome. But by the time she reached her 18th birthday, Isabel had grown to be a fair-haired beauty, a recht bonny queen. And een night, standing at the window of her father's castle, perched high up on Kinnaird Head cliff, she heard a tune, eerie and haunting, played on the pipes. Peering out into the starlit night, she spied a wee figure coming closer, and as he drew near, she saw it was a strapping young manny playing the bagpipes. In them days, it was custom to gie wandering musicians a warm welcome, some mate, a bed, and maybe some coin for their trouble. Isabel's heart fair leapt when the loony reached the castle door and was let in. She flew down the stairs to catch a glimpse of the mysterious piper. In the great hall, her father and brothers sat as the butler introduced the young man. Sandy Tulloch's the name, the piper said. He was travelling the land, earning coin to buy himself a commission in the army. The laird liked the sound of that, and bade Sandy to play for them. Well, Sandy was nae just good. He was a master of the pipes. He played reels, jigs, marches, and that made the hair on Isabel's neck stand on end. By the time he finished, Isabel was smitten with a reed-haired piper, clad in his plaid. Sandy joined them for supper, regaling the family with stories of his travels from Orkney to Caithness, down through the Highlands, and finally to the north-east coast. He told them he hoped to reach Edinburgh soon, with enough money to present himself to the king for service. The night after, the family went to bed. Isabel couldn't sleep. Restless, she wandered to the main hall where she found Sandy practising on his junter. She'd never seen such a thing afore, and Sandy, kind as ever, explained how pipers used it to learn new tunes. They spoke awa the night, and afore long the twa were fast friends. After that, Sandy and Isabel met in secret, down by the shore each night. Their friendship turned to love, and Sandy asked for her hand in marriage. Isabel promised to go with him to Edinburgh, where they'd be wed and he'd join the army. But Isabel's father suspicious or sneaking off, followed her one night and overheard the piper's proposal. Raging at the insult to the Fraser name, the laird ordered Sandy to be seized. The piper was chained and flung into the Selkie Hole, a sea cave below the wine tower that filled with water at high tide. Isabel confronted her father, demanding to ken what he'd done with Sandy. "Yon sleekit piper laddie is aneath ye," he roared. "You're a laird's dochter. You'll nae marry a commoner while I draw breath." He refused to tell her for Sandy was, and locked her in the wine tower. At night was agony for Isabel, as she listened to the waves crashing against the rocks, praying for Sandy's escape. At dawn, her father dragged her to the cave to see her lover's fate. There, on the sodden cave floor, lay Sandy's lifeless form. Isabel threw herself at his body, wailing with grief. Her father hauled her back to the wine tower, leaving her to come to her senses. But Isabel climbed to the roof, stood on the edge, and cried out, "Farewell all life's joys, our bridal waits below the tide." Then she leapt into the churning waves below. Her brother found her broken body hours later, bringing her back to the castle in silence, tears streaking down his cheeks. "What have you done, father?" he sobbed. The laird said nothing. Racked with guilt, he spoke nae a word for months after. They say the rocks below the wine tower still run reed, painted in memory o' Isabel and her piper. On stormy nights, folk claim they hear the mournful wail of pipes, and some swear they've seen Isabel's ghost leaping for the tower and her silk gown billowing like wings. Though history records nae quang ca'd Isabel, the legend lives on. The wine tower, once a chapel for Lady Fraser, still stands a day, but the tale of Isabel and Sandy lingers like the sea spray on the wind. There's a street in Fraserburgh called Marconi Road, in remembrance of a short event in the town's history. Guglielmo Marconi, the man that gave us the radio, spent a wee bit of time here in Fraserburgh back in 1904. And it's nae something you hear about a lot, but it's true. The Broch played its own part in the story of wireless technology. You see, Marconi was awfu' busy back then, running about the place setting up wireless stations to help ships at sea keep in touch with the shore. Fraserburgh, with its big fishing fleet and position on the North Sea, was the perfect spot for a station. Folk were needing better ways to send messages, nae just for weather or good crack, but to make sure if any boats got in trouble out there, help could get to them quicker. So Marconi and his team arrived to set up the gear. You can imagine it. All the wires, aerials and fancy gadgets folk wouldn't have seen afore. Nae doubt some brokers would have been standing about scratching their heads thinking, "What's this loon doing with that contraptions?" But it was clever stuff. He was testing out his wireless technology, making sure it worked to connect the shore with the ships out in the water. A lifesaver for the fisher folk and merchant ships alike. And Athen went more or less to plan. He tested his radio signals by making transmissions from the Broch all the way down to Cornwall. Abdi thought he was daft for trying such a thing, but the thing is, it actually worked. The wireless station here in the Broch was just one link in a bigger chain, but it showed just how far Marconi's ideas were reaching. And after eyes trials and tests, it was clear the system worked. Eventually, ships could send signals to the shore, warning about storms or calling for help. A big step up for relying on flares or hoping another boat would spot you. And in those days gone by, the man working the communication station was called a Marconist, after the inventor himself. Though Marconi's visit was short-lived, it left its mark. He had nothing but good things to say about the Broch and the Brochers' hospitality. And of course, Fraserburgh's name got tied to the story of radio and modern technology, even if only a bitty. Folks still talk about it now and again, a wee reminder that even a quiet fishing town like Fraserburgh can have a place in world history. Marconi might have been for Italy, but he certainly left his footprint here on our coast. Marconi Day is celebrated with an event on the 25th of April every year. Speaking about folk that left their mark in history, perhaps quite a big name was the Beatles. You may have heard of them. And once upon a time they actually came to the Broch. It was back in 1960, long afore they were the global superstars we ken them as today. In fact, they were still finding their feet as a band, barely out of their skiffle days. It's not exactly a well-documented chapter, but here's what we ken about their trip to the Broch. The Beatles back then, with John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison and drummer Stu Sutcliffe, came to play at the Dalrymple Hall on the 23rd of May 1960. Aye, nae Ringo Starr just yet, and Pete Best wouldn't even join them until later that year. They were calling themselves the Silver Beatles at the time, part of a wee tour up here in the northeast to support the Johnny Gentle, a Liverpool crooner that was mair weel kent back then. So how did you end up coming to the Broch? Well, to be honest, they were scraping the barrel for gigs at the time. The tour was arranged by a promoter, that figured taking folk up to Scotland might drum up some popularity, and Fraserburgh was just one of the stops on the tour. They also played in places like Forres and Keith, and it's funny to think about them traipsing round the wee tunes with their gear, likely dreaming about playing to packed out stadiums, nae a handful of folk in a local hall. But the journey up to Fraserburgh was now through its mishaps. On the road up to Dalrymple Hall, the driver, Jerry Scott, told Johnny Gentle to take the wheel. Well, Gentle ended up smashing the wee van into another car, and the drummer, Tommy Moore, got a dunt in the head and some broken teeth when the group's gear fell on top of him. While Moore was getting sorted out at the hospital, John Lennon and the promoter for the Dalrymple Hall showed up and fair marched him to the gig, awa with a heap of sedation. Moore still played the show, even though he barely kent where he was, and the show must get on, I suppose. The folk at the Dalrymple Hall that night wasn't exactly massive. Again, a few folk that were there claim there was maybe about 20 or 30 in the audience. Can you imagine that? John Lennon strumming awa, Paul McCartney singing, and half the folk probably nae even paying them much heed. They were just another backing band at the time, nae the legends that we see them as now, and apparently they gave it laldy. Even back then, you could tell they had something special. Energy, charisma, and a knack for the music. But to the Broch folk, it was just another night out, again a few tunes on. So there's nae much record of what the Beatles got up to while they were here, and I wouldn't imagine the Broch had much to offer for young Liverpudlian lads back then, but maybe they wandered down to the harbour or grabbed a bite for the local chipper. It's funny to think of them mingling about the tune, just ordinary lads at the time. Of course, within a few years, the Beatles were taking over the world with Beatlemania. Nobody in the Broch back in 1960 could have kent they were watching future icons. And it's one of those stories that gets bigger with time. The Beatles played here, nae chance. But aye, it happened. Even if it's new just a wee hidden gem of Fraserburgh's history. There's a small plaque dedicated to the troupe just outside the Dalrymple Hall. The waters of Philorth is the estuary where the River Philorth meets the North Sea, located a wee bit southeast of Fraserburgh. The area is kent for its sandy dunes, scenic coastline, and its role as a local nature reserve. It's a peaceful place, perfect for a wander or to spot a bit of wildlife. The river itself flows through land that has been connected to the Fraser family for centuries. In fact, it's said the Fraser lairds took their name for this area, and their influence has shaped its history. The Frasers of Philorth have been tied to the land since the 16th century. They were a powerful family, and they played a major role in the history of the Broch. The 8th Laird of Philorth founded Fraserburgh in 1592, aiming to turn it into a bustling port and a centre of trade. Sadly, his grand plans fell short, but the Fraser name is still written in our Broch's history. And the lands round the waters of Philorth were part of the Fraser estates for generations, and they took great pride in keeping the area maintained. You can still see echoes of their legacy in the surrounding landscape. Here's a fascinating bit of history. It's said there was once a wee village of Philorth. It's gone now. Some reckon it was abandoned due to the shifting sands and the encroaching dunes, which swallowed up the land. There's no much left to see of the village, but the story adds a wee air of mystery to the place. The Waters of Philorth is now a designated local nature reserve, and it's a haven for wildlife. The dunes and estuary provide a habitat for a range of birds, including waders, terns and wild fowl. And if you're lucky, you might spot a common seal basking on the shore, or see some rare plants growing among the sand. It's also an important part of Scotland's conservation efforts. Dune systems like this are fragile ecosystems, and the reserve helps protect them while giving folk a chance to enjoy the natural beauty. Where a place is all and atmospheric as the Waters of Philorth, it's nae surprise there are a few tales tied to it. There's an old story about a ghostly lady said to wander the banks of Philorth waters. Some say she's the spirit of a Fraser wife who drowned there long ago, searching for her husband lost at sea. It's a romantic, if eerie tale that's been told round the Broch for generations. There are whispers of buried treasure beneath the dunes. Some say it's loot left behind by smugglers who used the remote coastline to hide their goods. Others reckon it's the remains of the village, lost ancient artefacts for the Picts who once roamed this land. Though nobody's found anything of note, it's still a fun tale to think about as you wander about the sand. Nowadays, the Waters of Philorth is a much-loved place for quiet walks, a bit of bird watching or a picnic. The sound of the waves, the cries of the seabirds, and the open skies make it a perfect escape with the hustle and bustle. Locals have been coming here for ages, whether it's to enjoy the fresh air or to reflect on the history of this peaceful place. Now, it is with great reservation that I include this next bitty, but I just canna help myself. It's too good. Whether true or nae, we're a' here for a good time. So there's a page on Facebook called the Broch Photo House, and they tell this story back in 2020, and I think we should just cement it here in fact, as maybe one of the best stories in Scottish folklore. So, here we go. Long afore Fraserburgh was even called Fraserburgh, there was a wee settlement round the castle at Kinnaird Head. The place was officially called Faithly, but nae bugger called it that. It was aye kent as a Broch. Now back then, the Broch folk were aye on edge, keeping an eye on the sea in case some chuncers came sailing in to gie them a recht clatter. So they decided they needed to get serious, so they hired a big-shot mercenary knight called Sir Ben Eyre to shape up the local militia. A kind of medieval gym coach, if you like. So Sir Ben, being nae Egypt, realised pretty quick that the local loons were keen enough and they can't find who to wield a pitchfork or a big stick. But if a load of Vikings showed up, they'd hae as much chance as a coup in a butcher shop. So he started thinking about reinforcements. Now, this is where it gets a wee bit daft, because Sir Ben kent that in the Forest of Philorth there was still some Scottish tigers knocking about. Aye, tigers, nae the African ains, nae the Asian ains, but the Scottish variety, Leo Caledonis tigris, a kind of furry battle tank with teeth. They were rare as hen's teeth even then, but apparently they could be trained like big stripy dogs. So Sir Ben managed to round up 4 of these beasts. No idea how, maybe he dangled a haggis as bait, and he trained them up to be his secret weapon. He named them Faithfully, Keswick, Kinnaird and Philorth, and the Broch militia were feeling fair smug about their battle cuts. So the big day came. The Viking longships landed on the beach, full of hairy lads shouting and swinging axes about, looking like they'd had a bad day at IKEA. They charged up the sands, thinking they were in for an easy time. The Broch militia held the line. Well, they were nae bad again. They were feeling the strain. Sir Ben bided his time. Then, with a big dramatic flourish, he unleashed the tigers. The Vikings stopped dead in their tracks. The tigers came roaring down the beach like a furry battering ram, muscles flexing, teeth gleaming like they'd been out of the Colgate advert, and claws sharp enough to do your tatty's way. It was carnage. Limbs fleeing, Vikings running, and the beach looking like a wrecked midden by the time the tigers were done. The Norsemen were fair scunnered, and the few who managed to leg it back to their boats were greeting like barons who had lost their sweeties. After that, the Vikings decided to give the Broch a wide berth. Their legends started speaking of beasts for hell on the coast of Scotland, and that was the last time the Broch folk saw a longship. But no victory comes without its sacrifices. Peer Keswick, Kinnaird and Philorth were often wounded in the fight and didn't pull through. They were buried with the full military honours on a sandy brae at the end of the beach, with half the town turning out to say their farewells. Sir Ben Eyre, accompanied by Sir Benihus and Lady Anna Ken, read out a proclamation for the king, declaring that the place would forever be called Tiger Hill in their memory. The last tiger, Faithfully, lived on as a local celebrity, lapping up the attention for the Broch folk, probably fiefing scraps for the chipper, until he eventually died at all age and was buried with his pals on Tiger Hill. That was the end of the Scottish tigers, new extinct sadly. So there you have it. That's how Tiger Hill at Fraserburgh Beach got its name. But here's the £1 million question. True or tall tale? What do you think? And to be honest, I dinna think it matters. It's a good story, I think. But thanks for watching, folks. We'll see you next time in Scotland, a path less known.